Welcome back to the BuiltOnAir podcast. We are in episode 4 of season 21. Good to be with you. I've got our regulars, Ali and Camille will be back shortly. Stepped away for a second. And we have special guest with us, Julian Post. Welcome, Julian.
Hello.
Good to have you on with us. We'll get into Julian's been on the show before, so we'll get a brief update on what he's got going on, and he'll show us some cool stuff. I'll walk us through what we're going to be talking about on the show today. First, we'll start with our round the bases on everything going on, what people are talking about, and any news or updates in the world of Airtable. Then a quick shout out to our sponsor, OnToAir and OnToAir Backups. And then Julian's going to walk us through how to build a custom GPT that can talk to Airtable. And then we've got Camille is going to show us how to build a simple timesheet solution in a base and in Airtable. And then how to join our community. And then we'll end with Ali and how to do time frame comparisons, comparing times this year versus last year and things of that nature. So cool tidbits and tricks for you. Around the bases, first let's start with new. They posted a new feature in the What's New database, and this has been around for a while. I think we actually already talked about it, but they finally updated their base. So basically you can format AI fields as a number, percent, or currency. So that's kind of nice. I actually do like the example here of like being able to extract from your document a number, and like your quarterly earnings statement, you could extract a number and insert it into a table. That's a pretty cool use case if that can work correctly. So yeah, that's the only new feature announced. I didn't see any new features spied by anybody, so it might have been a relatively slow week on that front. Okay, here's one. We've talked about a couple other ways that people are helping the people out in Camille's neck of the woods in LA with the fires. Here's another one. Somebody built a portal to help people who have lost their homes if they're in need of furniture or other items. Here's a portal that will allow you to say, you've got a furniture that you can share, or if you're in need. And so that's kind of cool use of Airtable. We've seen others as well for people helping out with places to stay and things like that. So that's cool. Let's see, what do we got next? Oh, that's an old one. Okay, going into AI, we're going to talk a little bit about AI, but just kind of keeping you up to date on how AI is evolving. Perplexity is an AI chat engine, and they've just launched assistants. So this is kind of like the next phase of AI, is basically AI agents or assistants that can perform tasks in the background. So this can actually like browse the internet and complete a task for you in the background and things like that. So that's kind of cool. And I'm starting to see more and more of this type of functionality, the next evolution of AI moving beyond just chat to AI agents. And what we got here, speaking of AI, and how like some tools just will not go away. That is Excel. So this is somebody built an AI add-on to Excel that allows you to run essentially a large language model inside of Excel. So let me see, I think there's a screenshot of it. So in a cell formula, you can perform stuff like that. So cell M. So that's kind of cool. You don't need fancy new AI tools. You can use your trusted old Excel, do some stuff in there.
All right, sure.
It's just crazy that people are still spending development time and resources to work inside of Excel.
Right.
There's a great article called Excel Never Dies that basically talks about all the reasons that people love Excel, which I think is a good read because they make a lot of good points.
Yeah. Yeah, it has not gone away, although my usage of it has definitely decreased quite a bit. Okay, what else we got here? This is another big AI announcement. So Stargate project. So this is a combination of OpenAI. Let's see, where's the list? SoftBank, OpenAI, Oracle, MGX. They've put together $500 billion with $100 billion to be spent immediately to go towards the infrastructure of AI in the US. So that's a lot of money going towards that. So Stargate. So if you've got a good idea that can help with the AI infrastructure, there is a lot of cash out there ready to be burned. See how that is spent, what that entails for the future of AI. Okay, moving on. Here's kind of a cool trick Russell showcases in the BuiltOnAir community, how to build dynamic charts and then send them in your emails. So he's using a third-party tool. I've used it in the past for some kind of pet projects. Quick Chart. So it's basically you can send your data to an API endpoint and it'll give you back a URL that's an image, and then you could save that image as an attachment and then use that image in an email. Or I guess you could even just use the URL from Quick Chart. That might be what he's doing. So that's kind of a cool trick. So if you're needing charts or anything like that, that's a nice little hack to do that with a tool that's relatively inexpensive.
Yeah, I think it's a really nice sort of tip. We know emails in Airtable are very limited in what you could put on it, and things like this are helpful. I get requests all the time for I want a summary email, and sometimes text just isn't enough, and I think you can convince people faster with a bar chart.
Yep. Yeah, charts make everything prettier. Okay, next one. All right, I know, Ali, you were in this thread. This is kind of an interesting one. We're going to see if we can help diagnose what the issue is. So so Lauren has a formula or a filter. So here's the filter that she has on a view. And then she created a formula trying to recreate the same parameters that are in this filter. And then that formula prints out, I don't know, like yes or no, maybe, or prints out different values. And then she filters based off of those values. And she's trying to get the same number of records, the same records to show in the filter as are showing in the formula. And so there's some troubleshooting back and forth. Thoughts on this?
Yeah, I'd be interested to see where she ended up after Russell chimed in a few things. He noticed there's quite a lot missing from her formula that's shown in the actual filters that are not in the formula, which could absolutely have an effect. She did mention that it was weird that the formula is returning, the number that's filled in for the formula is higher than what's being returned from the filter, which is really interesting. I would need to look further at it. But I think the original issue, or a lot of it, might have to do with just field types and data types. Originally she had, does not equal blank, the function blank, which can produce some wonky results depending on your field types or data types. So it's really, I think, just looking at what each data type is and figuring out if you're properly saying it's empty or not.
Yep. And if any of those fields are lookups, sometimes even though a lookup looks blank, it's not actually blank, unless you've added conditionals to make sure that the value it's looking up is blank, so it's not returned. So there's a lot of hidden gotchas that are like visually invisible until you sort of do a deep dive. So on top of what Ali said, if any of those are lookups, then you have a little bit more investigating to do as well.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that the main thing, so it deals with arrays. I think it has to do with some of these are likely array values, and the comparisons are not exactly the same. So yeah, I think your suggestion of converting it to a string and then comparing is likely gonna get you closer.
Exactly. And then Russell had also pointed out that in the formula, she's saying where contact type equals local level elections, but the filter says contact type is none of, and she's filtering out everything else that's not local level elections. But that alone could cause issues because this is including empty contact types as well, whereas the formula is only looking at local level elections. So that's probably, I think, a big piece.
Yeah, interesting. So, but I think it is good to kind of understand there are differences in a formula versus the filter. Okay, next one. We've got reminder, if you are interested, Airtable, the community is having an open feedback exchange. So this is tomorrow at 8:30 Pacific. So there's a link here. You can sign up and give the community any feedback you want to see, any improvements. Sounds like they want to hear from us as a community on how they can do better. So we've got some input there. Feel free to join. And last one, just kind of an update on the Airtable community. They've made some changes to their introduction course. And then, so this kind of just walks through all the changes that they made. And then the last thing I thought was interesting was there's a new part of the Builder Essentials that talks about value realization. I thought that was kind of interesting on how you can realize the most value from your base, understanding the impact there. So good course material if you're looking to ramp up your education. And yeah, that's kind of it. It was a relatively quiet week in the Airtable world. So that concludes everything on that front. Quick shout out, if you're running your business on Airtable, best practice is to back up your data outside of Airtable. And I have a case study today. So on Twitter, somebody said just lost all their data in their Terso. So Terso is kind of like I'm drawing a blank. What's the database that you're using, Camille?
Supabase.
Supabase. So Terso is kind of like a Supabase alternative where you can kind of run your database here. And apparently they had an incident, and all the data on one of their AWS servers was lost, and so they had to send an email out to anybody that was affected by this. So it wasn't all of their customers, but anybody that was running on the one specific AWS region, their data was all lost. And so here's their apology letter. They're like, well, it was a beta, so it's kind of your fault, but sorry.
That I would hate to be that person who has to send that email, because my goodness.
Yeah. But they did, at least they refunded your monthly payment for anybody that's on a paid plan.
Well, at the very least, my goodness.
Including overage charges. So that's unfortunate, but that is why you need to have your data backed up outside of your primary source. So that's where OnToAir comes in. It'll make sure your data from Airtable is backed up to Box, Dropbox, Google Drive, or OneNote. And you can have peace of mind that if you ever get an email like this, I don't expect it from Airtable. I'm not suggesting that I know that they have backups of their data, but it's still best practice to keep it outside of your primary source as well to avoid letters like this. Okay, Julian, gonna teach us a little bit about AI and custom GPTs and how they fit into the world of Airtable. So Julian, tell us a little bit about yourself and then let's jump in.
Sure, yeah. So my name is Julian Post and I'm an Airtable consultant, and I also create video tutorials on YouTube. I have a YouTube channel that with lots of different content on Airtable and other tools. And yeah, and I've been I think was maybe more cautious around AI for the first year or so of its existence, but have been getting actually more and more excited about it as the tools get better. Definitely using it a lot for coding, JavaScript use cases in Airtable. And then also I had a couple clients ask about whether they could hook up an agent to it, and so that's how I started experimenting with this use case.
Cool. Yeah, if you want to share your screen, you can jump in.
All right. Can you see my screen?
Yeah.
Okay, and you can see the Airtable base?
Yes.
Yes.
Great. So this is an Airtable base that is it has one table in it, a table of guests, and these guests are people who are coming to my wedding. Says their name, their email, whether they're attending, and what they're eating for dinner, whether they're bringing a +1.
Can I get an invite to this wedding?
I was gonna. My goodness.
It's I'll send it to you after, Dan. And so this is a custom GPT, and so basically I'm going to show you it working first, and then I'll describe more about how it's set up. But this is my custom GPT here called Guest List, and I can ask it questions about the guests and get responses. So I guess maybe I'll crowdsource some questions that you all might have. Just keep in mind that this is the information available.
Is Tupac gonna make it? I have my
All right.
doubts.
Oh,
Oh no.
Oh no.
all right. And this does highlight something that I've experienced, which is that it's a bit inconsistent. And I'll explain to you why that might be. But let's see. So it does ask sometimes whether you want to access the API. Okay, so it looks like, let's actually find Tupac in here.
There it is.
Line
Yeah.
12.
There isn't any information, so maybe that's why. So maybe we ask it about Will Smith and see what it says. All right, so it's yes, does tell us that Will Smith is coming, yes. And then I'm just gonna actually test this and see if we say no for Tupac. So this might indicate that it's using information that it already pulled.
Cached.
So anyway, so I think this is a good time for me to go into how it works.
Awesome.
So the steps that I took to get here were to create the Airtable base, create a custom GPT, which I'll show you in a minute. And then you need to create a personal access token so that the GPT can communicate with the Airtable API and have authorization. And then you need to get the Airtable base schema, which is something that you can get from the Airtable API. So in this, this is an automation here, a scripting automation that will allow you to do that. And you don't need to really even set up a trigger, because you can just test it, put in your personal access token and your base ID, and call this API URL, and then you get this schema here, which is a schema of your specific Airtable base, and then you use that to teach the GPT how to access it. So going into this GPT here, edit. So there are some instructions that tells it how to interact with the guests, but the most kind of critical piece of this is so you have you're configuring your custom GPT here, and you can add what's called an action. If I go into this action, you are able to enter the personal access token as an API key up here, and then you put in this schema that you create. And so the schema, the prompt that I used to create the schema was specifically using a GPT called Actions GPT, which they provide you as a way to create these schemas. And so it's saying, please generate an open API schema based on the below example here. And that example comes from these examples here. It's this one. And we're saying this was for a different one that I was doing, but basically when you have it create an open API schema, it actually creates kind of its own API endpoint that you call. And so you might give it some information about what you want it to be doing. So in this case, like, we're trying to find guests based on information about them. And then you give it that example, and then you would put your base ID and then your Airtable schema below. What it spits out is this open API schema, and then it kind of looks at that and sees these different endpoints. And so, like, what it's probably using when I say, like, you know, is Tupac coming to the wedding? It's probably using either this list guests request or the get guest request. Any questions so far? Thoughts?
And so basically maps those actions to the underlying, API call.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so, you know, if you're having errors, it may be how these are mapped to the actual API call to Airtable. And that could be altered. The personal access token that I created, I did give it write access as well. So that is another thing that I hadn't shown, but we could see.
Thinking about it.
Cool.
Let's see, did it work? Yes.
There he is.
Coming. That's awesome.
You see that the GPT
Yeah.
did it.
Cool.
So yeah, that's the basics.
Can you ask it like how many people are attending?
So I will ask it and see what it says. I have
Yeah.
experimented with this and gotten incorrect answers, which is kind of interesting. Like I think I asked it a more specific one, like how many people are eating ribeye,
Right.
and it gave me the wrong. Like it found most of them, but not all of them.
Wonder if it knows how to paginate.
I was just about to say paginated questions, and then we saw like it got whether Tupac was going incorrect, so it might have been like a cache thing as well.
Hmm. So this is saying that 30 people are attending, and if we go ahead and say where attending is yes.
26. It can't count well. I mean, isn't it well known that ChatGPT is not very good at math?
Yeah,
It's so bizarre. That
It's really bizarre, right?
it is. It's weird because you're like, what did it do to get like a close but incorrect answer?
That's so funny.
Now, why would you invite Ted Bundy? Can't help but notice.
Judging my my wedding choices, Will, this is the I think it's the top 50 most searched names on Wikipedia.
Got it. Okay. I was like, what do these people have in common?
can then invite him through ChatGPT.
That's right. Yeah. Well, I wonder if I ask it. I'm a
Yeah, it had a delete.
record.
Had a delete record. Whoa.
Hmm.
Response 1 or response 2?
Is there any info on either of these responses?
Can't click them either.
I'm going with response 2.
Interesting.
All right.
Is he
Well,
there?
he's not there.
Whoa.
He's gone.
It worked.
Yeah.
If you unfilter this view, did it say he's not attending, or did it delete the record? It deleted the record.
It deleted the record.
Huh.
Interesting. Cool.
Yeah. Yeah. Wow.
So it did what we asked. ChatGPT is just being a little odd. And which one of these things of nothing are better?
Yeah. So there's, and I think one other experience that I had with this is that this is the first example I did, and then I recreated it the other day with a good amount of confidence because it had worked the first time, and I recreated the exact same steps, and I still had some troubleshooting where it wasn't working. And that's the kind of problem with it, is because you're relying so heavily on the AI to set it up and create that schema. It's not totally consistent. So, I mean, it could work better than it worked the time before, but it also could work worse. And you really have to get into the details or just use natural language to tell it to keep modifying it in order to get the outcome that you want.
Yeah.
Oh, Justin wrote in the chat, I don't know if you talked about this, where he says maybe it's also counting the +1 values.
Oh,
Mm.
Well,
I don't think so.
I don't think so either.
However,
That would be interesting.
So that's 15.
15 plus 15, that's 30.
oh well.
No, that's +1.
Yeah,
You're not filtering
there's
by attending.
28 going. Yeah.
I misread your filter.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's just making numbers up. Like there's 2 R's in strawberry.
Very interesting.
Yeah. So, but I do think that this would be that, you know, if you do spend more time kind of calibrating it, and also with the instructions, like I think you could probably have it So if I go into here in these instructions, you could maybe give it more instructions that say like specifically any question that the user asks should go to this API endpoint, and specifically you're always trying to make an API request that looks at, you know, these 3 or 4 attributes and returns a person or a return. Like, I think you could be more specific on how it does stuff that might end up producing more consistent results depending on what you're trying to achieve.
Yeah. Very cool. Awesome. Thank you, Julian, for sharing that. Where can people find you if they want to work with you?
You can find me at 3rings.co. That's the number 3rings.co. And on YouTube, and my channel is called Julian Post, my name.
Very cool. Thank you for that insight. Okay, Camille, let's create a timesheet. Put you up.
So this example, I sort of came up with as an exploration of is this an easier use case to build now that interfaces are where they are today? So I think one of the first things I tried to use Airtable for in my last job was to do all of my timesheets during COVID. And it was not a nightmare, but deeply inconvenient, even for me who looks at Airtable all day anyway. So I think I came up with something that is decent, I think, for a very rudimentary use case. So just a brief explanation of the structure I have. Employees, pretty straightforward, except I do have a current rate field. So what is their hourly rate today? And then a timesheets table, which operates on a weekly basis. So there's an automation that runs every Sunday to create new records for each employee. So as long as you have 1,000 or fewer employees, you'll be fine with just a regular automation to create these records weekly in one run. And then each one is tied to an employee for a particular week. It stamps the value of your hourly rate because over time, hopefully you get paid more. But we don't want to update that for every record you've had in the past. So every week we're saying, well, what are we currently paying this person? So you have like a running history of how much they were paid over time. And then there's a link to the log table, which would have one record for each individual day of that week. And then just a little math to sort of add up those numbers together, and then a submitted field. So once you're done with a timesheet, normally what happens is whoever did the work submits it, and then someone else either approves it or, actions on it in some way. So having a field for status allows you to operationalize that a little bit. And then on the interface side, what I can do is I'm going to try and start over and hope that I can force this to work. So we're going to say to run this 835. Wait, no, it won't let me get specific. No, I ruined it.
You can.
Okay, pivot. I would do test automation maybe because there's a multiple sort of step action. It won't let me. So I'm going to run this for one person and we'll see how it goes. Doing as I said before, I'm stamping the value of the hourly rate, and then because this is a time-based trigger, I could say when the automation is run, that's the week that timesheet is for. And then instead of having that's new. I haven't seen that before. Instead of having one create record step per day of the week. I felt like that'd be annoying to maintain. So I created a record template. So it's taking the timesheet we just created and then applying a template to it. Oh, I see. Run is configured. Record created. Am I crazy? I am crazy. I did this wrong. No. This is the most chaotic demo I've done in a while, and it's the simplest one. So if that worked accordingly, my 2 tests that we don't need, I'm going to delete them. I have one timesheet for one of the employees and then log records created for one day of the week. So an advantage of using record templates in this case are you can do relative dates. So for my template, if I go into it really quickly, 7-day timesheet, I have these 7 records set up here, but each of these are a relative date to whatever the timesheet's start date is on. And so each of them is 0 days after, 1 day after, etc. And so that's how I get that all in there using one automation run per week, which is pretty nice and I think fairly efficient. So if I go to the one person I have a timesheet for, now I'll be able to enter time for this particular person. So with that basic structure in place, there's a few things that you could do that would kind of jazz up this sort of workflow, and it depends on what your business process is. So realistically, you would probably want, like, I should only be entering in my timesheet and I really shouldn't see anyone else's unless I'm their manager. So additional infrastructure that you could put into the very basic structure I went over is on your employees table, include a manager field that has some linked relationship between either here are my direct reports or here's all the people who report to me, because employees is one table. Linked records aren't bidirectional, which is a complaint I have. But if I do manager, link to employees, you probably only have one manager. Now I would be able to say that my guinea pig, his manager is me. So you would be able to set up filters on the interface side to say, will only show me, or people whose manager is me, if that makes sense. And then from there, once you're on a page that you should have access to, there's things like you probably don't want to submit timesheets for someone or for a week that's already been submitted previously. You don't want to continue to enter the same data over and over for the same day. And if you're submitting it to your manager to review, you don't want to make changes after after it's been sent to them, because that might affect whether or not they approve it. So there's some simple permissioning that you could set up. Depending on what plan level you have for Airtable, interfaces have different capabilities. So I've sort of mocked up, here's where you would go to edit timesheets in progress, but you'll notice visibility is not something I can turn on the current plan I'm using for this demonstration. This is on the Teams account. I believe you need to be on business or higher in order to use visibility. So what you might do instead is have 2 different sections. One that says, maybe this is all timesheets, and it's not editable. And the one for timesheets in progress, maybe you want this one to be editable. I think I do that. I'll just turn that on for demonstration, but you would have a filter that says this is unsubmitted. So that's already on there. On this one, I would take that away because it's supposed to be all. So having two different sections where once I'm done with this record, status, once I change that to submitted, it goes away, but it remains in my non-editable all timesheets one. And then lastly, the actual design of entering in your daily values itself. Again, this is up to user preference. Probably you want this displayed as a view, whether or not it's a list view or a grid view. I think that's kind of up for, again, personal preference. But you're probably going to want the date shown. I have time in, time out, and break. I've seen in a lot of timesheets that I've used personally, they have two different sections: time in one, time out one, time in two, time out two. I hate that method of entering time because my days are pretty, repeatable. They're all the same. So I would rather say, here's where I started overall, where I ended overall, and I took an hour break in the meantime. But again, that's up to how anyone wants to set up for their particular business, if you need that level of specificity. And then for me, I used duration fields in order to do this. You could also use a single select drop down if you want like specified time increments. I do find duration fields somewhat annoying, because if I wanted to say I started work at 9 a.m., for instance, I would put in 9, but unless I put in a colon after, it's going to read by default as 9 minutes, which isn't great. So instead I would have to do 9 colon and then hit enter. And now it's registered at 9 a.m. And then for timeout, I could say in military time, it would be, I think, 18 and then 1 hour. So 8-hour workday, that's how I would put it in personally. Or you could use a single select with 9 a.m., 9:30 a.m., 10 a.m., etc. And there are a few tools, I think, in the extensions library already that help you create fields with time intervals kind of already in there. So you don't have to sit there and manually create those, which could get annoying.
Very cool. Yeah, this is a very common and useful use case.
Mm-hmm.
Good to walk through that. I'm just disappointed that Ted Bundy's not an employee at your company.
For some reason, I used Mockaroo for this to just get a bunch of fake data. Ted Bundy is not one of the selections that just gets populated. Who would have thought?
Cool. Thank you, Camille, for that. All right. If you are not in our BuiltOnAir community, join us with the 4 of us and thousands of others. We're getting close to hitting our 2,000 mark, which would be a great milestone for us. Also, be sure to subscribe to our newsletter and subscribe to our YouTube channel as well. So join us, builtonair.com/join, get you in for free and interact with some amazing people in our community. Finally, Ali, walk us through how to do time frame comparisons.
All right. Okay, so this is just a fun little trick that I've been working through for a while, and I just figured out a cool little hack to make some what I think are like useful charts out of this data. So this is all about using linked record fields and bending them to your will, I guess. I'm sure everybody might be a little familiar with charts and the limited capabilities of charts, and you really need to be able to have the data structured in exactly the right way to get a chart to show exactly what you need. And doing things like comparing trends over different time periods are not super easy to do in Airtable, and you really have to do some manipulation of the data to get it in the right spot. but this is an example that I think is relatively simple that can really do that well. And it's pretty flexible as well. So this is just a bunch of fake transactions from ChatGPT. I loaded them all in here, and really where this starts is at the days table. I used to kind of skip the days and just go right to months and then quarters and years, but I've found that having this days table actually is a lot more flexible because it lets you really get as granular as you want, and 300 records a year is not too terrible. 365. It's not going to balloon out of control very quickly. So I typically like to set up a base that's separate from my like production base to do this, where I'll sync in like the transactions table here. I might sync that in from a different base that I'm actually working in, and then do all of my time interval and dashboarding stuff over here just to save on record count and overhead for the main base. But neither here nor there. All transactions get linked up to a day, and then those days in turn get linked up to a month. Months get linked to quarters, quarters get linked to years, and then years get linked to summary, which is just one record holding all the years, so on and so forth. So once I've got everything linked to days, I just rolled up my gross transaction amount for that day, and then roll that up to the month table. So pretty simple so far. But then I have a couple little formulas, and they are essentially just calculating based on the date that this month has, what was the name of the record for this month last year. So it's basically just subtracting 1 year from the start date and outputting in the same format as the name, my primary field, what that month would have been. And I have that named this month last year. And I could stop there, but I took it a step further to make it some charts really cool. And I actually now am also calculating a field that has this month's name as well as this month last year's name. So each one of these is going to be, January of this year, January of the year before, January of the year before, then the year before that, so on and so forth, all the way down. Then I've just copied the values of these two columns and pasted them over these linked record fields, which are self-linking. So these link right back to the table that I'm on. You could use an automation for this. Absolutely might make it easier over time. But what I like to do is I just fill up all of these tables with like the next 10 years worth of data, and then just do one paste, copy and paste, and then I'm done and don't have to worry about it for 10 years or waste time building an automation. But you certainly can. So why is this cool? So I link each month to the month that came the year before, and then I can grab the gross from this month last year and pull it onto this record and do a calculation to compare those two values. So I am now down by a little over 50% as to where I was at last year. And I basically just take that concept and roll it all the way up through all of the tables. So I'm doing the same exact thing. I've got the gross of this quarter compared to this quarter last year, so on and so forth, all the way up to the years table, where I'm calculating, all right, overall, how much am I up or down? So that's super cool. But the coolest part is with that self-linking, like this month and this month last year. The reason why this is even a thing is if I take this field now and look it up on each table above it. So I'm looking this up here, and then same for like the quarters all the way up through. What?
I see where you're going.
It's pretty cool. It's like, So this is I just threw this together. It's not 100% done yet, but it'll show the idea that I'm going for. So I've got each year here. I'm using the hierarchy to show each year, then each quarter within that year, and then down into months. And I would eventually turn on detail pages for each one of these, but I only have done it for the year so far. If I open up the year, now I can look at this year, which is 2024, is the yellow, compared to the year before at a quarter level as well as at a monthly level. So I'm really just kind of, like I said, bending these linked records to my will and putting the data where I need it to be so that I can get these pretty looking charts.
Super cool.
Yeah, I'm really excited about this one. I think this is super cool. And it's really simple too. It like doesn't really require a lot of overhead, I guess. It's a lot to explain.
I'm so glad time is linear because that the formula for just like what was this month last year is very simple because, you know, it's a predictable value. And I really like this result. I think it's very clever, and I think this has to be one of those, like, you could make a chart in Airtable, but can you? And here you go.
Yes.
With a little bit extra infrastructure. And I don't imagine this is too many records. If you think of maybe at the day level, perhaps that's where a lot of extra records have, but you could set up, if you don't have transactions for that day, after that day has passed, delete the record because you don't need it.
Yeah, you certainly could. And if you're really only doing it, like, I think the syncing the data that you want to fit into these time interval buckets into this base from somewhere else definitely saves on record counts in both places, which is nice. But yeah, I do this all the time. I'm constantly trying to think of like new ways to improve upon this. One other thing that is, I think, a silly but also useful trick is if you link each record to itself, which is a silly thing to do, but 2022 is linked to 2022. Really, what this affords you is now on my detail page here, I've always been bothered that the number elements have to be from a linked record or a lookup of a linked record, and you can't like roll that up, and you can't use a number element to display a number that's on this record itself. But if you link it to itself, you can, because you can just have a number and then the source is this year, because all of those records are just linked to each other.
That's so silly, but it's true.
So I've been doing that a lot as well. And what I really love the conditional coloring, because I could do this percent change and then set up, you know, conditions to be like, if it's negative, go with red. Otherwise, green. But yeah, so having those things linked to each other is, or linking records to themselves does have a benefit.
Yeah, cool. Some good comments from people watching. Hear people say you no longer need days, weeks, months because interface filtering is good enough. But this is another reason why having them is powerful. You could also modify this for an analytics tracking dashboard as well.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
There's forever ago, I did a demo of a base that's, I believe, still on the Airtable universe. If you want to get it, the solution I do to categorize my finances, it'll like automatically tag it to the appropriate, I only do it at the month level, but tag this record to its equivalent month so I could do some stuff in it. But there's no notion of change over time because I didn't want to figure that out. So I may steal this to update that old solution just so that it's more complete.
Absolutely.
Cool.
Yeah, it's super fun.
All right. Thanks for sharing that, Ali. And that concludes today's show. We'll be back next week for another great episode. Be sure to join us then and have a good week, everyone.
Thank you.
Nice to be with you all.